This is what it looks like, typically, a peaceful march of the masses, and a lot of youngsters joining in the beat. Actually, it is to mourn a grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. That is Imam Hussein, third leader of the Shias. It all happened about 1,400 years ago, but the happening on Ashura lives on to inspire any resistance. And Shia Muslims each year commemorate the tragedy by marches and mourning. This year is a little different. To see how and learn of the spiritual meaning of it all, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. After cruel Umayyad rule, the children of the fourth Caliph, Ali the Infallible, ought to have taken the reins of Islamic rule. Among them, Hussein. But the Abbasids got in the way, and on their way to the seat of the Caliphate in the year 680 AD, or 61 Hijrah, Imam Hussein and his 72 companions were faced by what's known as the army of Yazid I. The resistance that ensued came to be known as an uprising. Mr. Tavakkoli, a West Asia political expert, draws parallels with current affairs. What similarities do you find between the Islamic resistance of today and the event of Ashura?
Resistance is in fact a ramification of Ashura, when you come to realize with regard to the Muslim world that the enemies of Islam, enemies of people, enemies of this geographical zone have mobilized their forces for maximum dominance, be it cultural, economic or geopolitical, upon regional nations. The common political logic, be it liberalism or nationalism, failed to find an answer. Even the most leading anti-hegemony movement like Marxism, which itself grew into a new force of dominance, failed to overpower capitalism and imperialism.
Imam Hussein was beheaded, as were his 72 companions, killed or taken as captive. Among those killed was Hussein's 6-month-old baby boy. This bears the question whether the resistance was pre-planned or consequential. But it happened. The blood of pure souls was shed. And under a millennium and a half later, in spite of a surge with COVID-19, mourning tents, yards and congregation halls named Husseinias were set up as Muharram set in. Mr. Jalali, a cleric of considerable rank, has one such yard in downtown Tehran, where he explained how he'd keep mourners safe.
از یک بهداشت کاملی برخوردار باشه این رو در زیر
We organized it in open air in order to respect health protocols. It has its own hardships like unrolling carpets every day and deploying sound equipment. The staff have to start working before dawn for preparations to be done in a timely manner. The rugs are numbered and installed based on social distancing standards. Those who want to attend are given masks and hand sanitizers at entry. That has been the case for all Muharram rituals.
And here's mourners in another location explaining why they are out to participate.
The substance of Imam Hussein's message is for just rule in the world, and justice should replace injustice. Imam Hussein carried this message through despite being exposed to the cutting and criminal blade of injustice. Imam Hussein told humanity that the world had to be dominated by just rulers as demanded by all messengers of God.
Imam Hussein's culture consisted of a culture barring submission to injustice and calling for uprising against vice. General Qasem Soleimani and Abu Muhandis were standard bearers of this culture, and we followed them.
Not everyone would sacrifice his family for his objective. Therefore, Imam Hussein's objective has been so significant that prompted him to sacrifice his family for Islam. I became a follower of Imam Hussein based on my own studies. I didn't just emulate my dad.
The religion was being deviated from its right path, but Imam Hussein put it back on the right track.
For students like me, Imam Hussein's sacrifice means we should try our best to develop science and technology in a bid to upgrade our country's status.
Muharram is the first month on the lunar Arabic calendar. This year, 2020, it began on August the 21st to mark the year 1441 to 1442. Mourning days run up to Tasua and Ashura, the 9th and 10th of the month, days that affect and inspire Shia behavior till today. How? Our interviewee explains. Why has the Islamic resistance been the most or only successful movement against the US and Israel?
اتفاق بزرگی که در دوره معاصر ما افتاد این هست که
The contemporary key event is that following the Ashura model, we opened a new way based on maximum resistance and sacrifice for Islam, liberty and freedom without any limitation. That drove regional nations, particularly those identifying further with Imam Hussein, to show sacrifice with a view to removing Western political, cultural and security dominance over the region. Important steps were taken, but we believe that a long way still lies ahead of us.
Why do Shias hold the Tasua Ashura ceremony each year? What current events over time have kept the flame alive?
The incident of Ashura is being remembered in an effort to teach people human values. And these lessons never become old-fashioned, because humanity is never old-fashioned. Once, the Mongols invaded Iran and beheaded hundreds of thousands of people, but Shia Iranians never mourned for the incident. So there must be something wrong here. Maybe the incident's faulty in some ways, which people decide not to mourn for it. When looked from this angle, we begin to realize that there are features in the Ashura incident which keeps it alive. Every human society or country which seeks to enjoy the same features will only need to resort to human values.
The nation among 200 million Shias worldwide are black-clad at large on the 10 days and on Arba'in, the 40th commemorative day that falls into the following month of Safar. Muharram is labeled the haram or forbidden month, when war is prohibited. In other words, Husseini resistance is meant to be peaceful. Interestingly, the Islamic resistance appears to have been more successful, perhaps even the only successful movement against the US and Israel, apparently because of its peaceful nature.
وجود مقدس امام حسین علیه السلام زمانی که مواجه میشن با لشکر دشمن.
Imam Hussein's conduct in the face of enemy troops carries a social lesson. When the enemy troopers were approaching, Imam Hussein did not cease to worry about their concerns, including physical health, like possible thirst. Therefore, Imam Hussein immediately ordered his commanders and water distributors to support water to enemy troops. When we see such conduct, we can't remain indifferent towards fellow humans.
I set out for Sharif University, where some of the country's cleverest minds are shaped to serve in science and engineering. But they've also got time for God and the saints. And it was in that time I decided to see how and why they and their neighbors are holding Tasua Ashura this year.
Everything was similar to last year, except for health protocols. I do not worry about my children's health because the health protocols are observed strictly.
Since 4 years ago, I had seen the number of mourners increasing year on year. However, this year, due to mandatory health protocols, few were present because of the physical distancing.
Congregations of believers are not easy to stop, and not everyone in the system cared to completely scrap the ceremony. It is a way of enlivening religious belief among youngsters, as the most popular cantors trigger their energy and thoughts. And with an economy in trouble, the nation can do with a little normalcy. This mourner sees no grounds for scrapping Muharram ceremonies.
All administrative affairs and most social activities are underway. When all those activities are done in compliance with health protocols, it would be obstinate to not hold Muharram rituals.
There may have been cause for misunderstandings stemming from confusion with the definition of resistance. Apparently, not every demonstration can class as constructive resistance or uprising. Here's a differentiation.
هر شورشی به اصطلاح مقاومت نیست، قیام نیست.
Any revolt is not uprising or resistance. Sometimes revolts are organized in protest at livelihood shortages, like when government organs fail to live on their pledges. But in some cases, there are rebellious acts being held from both inside and outside the country. That is counter-resistance. That is a coup plot for dominance.
The outer world also closely observes the marches and mourners of Muharram and Arba'in. I'll be back in no time with plenty more. In the meantime, I give you Shahrzad for a quick look at other media outlets.
Hi, my name is Shahrzad Madacheri, and we'll be looking online for the latest update on the mourning of Muharram amid the pandemic and how most are fighting to keep the spirit of resistance alive. Tehran Times takes a look into the travelogues, tapping into the past hearing Muharram rituals from Europeans visiting Persia. Travelogues of globetrotters, particularly European travelers to Iran during the lunar months of Muharram and Safar, bear narrations of Ashura, mourning ceremonies in different historical periods, some of which belong to the mourning ceremonies of Tasu'a and Ashura during the Safavid and Qajar periods, according to the National Library of Archives of Iran. In fact, travelogues are valuable sources which highlight different aspects of the Iranian social history, particularly where it is hidden from the eyes of Iranian historians. It is with the assistance of these travelogues that reconstruction of social, cultural, etc. spaces in the past becomes possible, and on the same basis, it may be claimed that travelogues include points that are very important in cultural historiography. One of the most important issues that are addressed in these travelogues is Muharram ceremonies amongst Iranians. The rituals performed in this month contain valuable cultural points that are portrayed in an interesting way by European tourists. Tehran Times claims Ashura legacy lies at the heart of the axis of resistance. Every year, millions of people in Iran and abroad participate in the mourning ceremonies for the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the Arba'in March, a phenomenon that has drawn attention in academic circles in terms of anthropology. Scientists and researchers shed light on the driving force behind the solidarity among the Iranian and Iraqi people during Muharram rituals. However, Muharram's importance is not limited to social phenomena. It is also the political importance and has played a significant role in mobilizing the people around the region against the US policies and its ally, Israel. The Ashura uprising is the underlying ideology of the axis of resistance, which aims to confront the US and Israeli arrogance, just as Imam Hussein alayhi salam confronted Yazid's arrogance and oppression. Mehrhane States German expert describes US, Israel, as today's oppressors. Referring to Imam Hussein's uprising against the oppressor ruler of his time, Dr. Marcus Fiedler described the US and Zionist regime as two oppressors of today's world. He said in an interview that the uprising of Imam Hussein and the positions of Islamic liberation theology seems highly topical, as the injustice in the world is becoming increasingly acute for everyone. According to an Oxfam report 2 years ago, 8 billionaires now own more than half of humanity, and the gap between rich and poor is widening. The uprising of Imam Hussein shows that one should not allow oneself to be intimidated, even in the face of the apparently enormous superiority of the oppressor's camp. In the course of history, all of the great empires, however invincible in their time, have perished. He added, throughout history, many notable personalities such as Nelson Mandela and Gandhi have cited Imam Hussein's stand against oppression as an example of their own fights against injustice. That's all for this segment. We'll see you next week.
We mentioned how Ashura was a mobilizing force to the axis of resistance, in turn mobilizing the region against the US and Israel, and now loose jihadism and Wahhabi and Takfiri sects. You recall General Soleimani, who was assassinated by the US just after New Year. He was instrumental in defeating Daesh or ISIS in Syria and Iraq by moving forces he likened to Imam Hussein and his small army of friends and family. In fact, he referred to Iranians as the nation of Hussein and expected them to plant the seeds of sacrifice and resisting oppressors everywhere. Hujjatul Islam Jalali explains how the Islamic resistance relates to Ashura. Why did General Soleimani call us the nation of Hussein? What do you see in the behavior of Shias that can attribute them to Imam Hussein?
When General
Soleimani said that we are the nation of Imam Hussein, he did not limit it to Shias. Everyone aware of Husseini lifestyle is a follower of him. I visited many countries and met with many people who were inspired by Imam Hussein.
Since there's been plenty of mention of Daesh and resisting it, as well as the US and Israel or US allies, well, Daesh is a monstrous terror group and among groups created or backed by the US when the time was right. They are, or actually were, a means of using religion against religion, or getting religion to shoot itself in the foot. This is evident in the atrocities of Daesh against fellow Muslims even. How does that promote the image or following of Islam? Daesh, the MEK or Iran's Mujahideen, known as the Hypocrites, and the Al Saud dynasty are now all aligned against the Islamic resistance. The enemy is equipped with every dark force, and Iran cannot stop its regional policy. In fact, it calls the war on terror a holy war, while differentiating between martyrdom and suicidal acts of terror.
Islamic resistance is essentially seeking peace and emancipation from dominance. Peace with someone who submits to dominance would mean nothing. That would be slavery that may appear in various forms. What Islamic resistance started and is pursuing is to bring genuine peace, liberty and freedom to societies. To that end, we have seen numerous physical, military, economic and media wars and scorched earth policy in recent years.
Iran's method is the resistance against foreign forces in the region and their strongholds, especially the ones slowly wiping the holy shrines and Palestine off the map, Israel. In fact, Foreign Minister Zarif, who was key himself in negotiating the 2015 nuclear deal, has pointed, cooperation among Muslims in confronting Zionism, supporting the Palestinian resistance and restoring the issue of Palestine as the first issue of the Islamic world is the secret of regional unity. To Iranian leaders, Zionism and imperialism are two sides of the same coin. And superpowers' aim in creating Israel does not end in the occupation of Palestine. They plan to extend the fate of Palestine to all Arab countries, they say. In a speech delivered just 13 days after the 2015 nuclear deal was signed, the leader Ayatollah Khamenei stressed, "We will not abandon our regional friends."
داعش ثمره یک تلاش گسترده
You know that Daesh is a product of widespread efforts by intelligence services to fill a vacuum in the society. When I talked with youth in Kabul and other Afghan cities, they were seeking a sense of dignity which they saw it in Shiism.
Iran's support for Palestinian groups has been a key feature in spearheading pro-resistance and pan-Islamic solidarity. Groups such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad and the Secular Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Iran's support for and by the Axis stems from its revolutionary ideology of wanting to be a cause, not just a country. For and since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's leaders have legitimized acts of resistance and uprising if recognized to be anti-oppression. Well, the 8-year war of the 80s waged on Iran by Iraq is an unquestionable example. In drawing on the Ashura narrative of the victims voiceless but standing, perhaps hoping for time to set the record straight, this country interestingly did this. When Iran accepted the UN Resolution 598 for the ceasefire with Iraq, its substantial demand was not war reparations, but to be recognized as the victim of invasion, and that it finally achieved. It was the Islamic faith that drove our youngsters during the 8-year war. If there were another war to break out now, what do you think would drive them? How would you suggest adapting the religious beliefs to keep them going with the youngsters?
بی‌تعارف بگم به عنوان محقق تاریخی به عنوان کسی که
As a historian who has authored biography of many martyrs and has been at the war front, I would say that those who are today fighting Daesh have done much more sacrifice than what we did. Those who are fighting Daesh in Syria have much stronger faith than our generation. We really envy them and we feel that we are distant from them.
Another example is resistance against Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. And in case you're wondering how it all started, revolutionary Shiism emerged in the 1960s in response to global anti-colonial movements. It centered on resistance against oppression with a look to Shia fighters and martyrdom, and by drawing on the Karbala metaphor. To Iran as a state, the tale is more than a script for passion plays or even history books. The post-revolutionary constitution commands support for the oppressed and Muslims of the world, and it's claimed to have been inspired by the ordeal of Imam Hussein and companions. The merging of the Islamic Revolution and the resistance movement with the ideals of the Ashura uprising can be seen in Chapter 10 on Foreign Policy, Article 152. That bases the country's foreign policy on the rejection of any kind of domination, the preservation of all-inclusive independence of the country, the defense of the rights of all Muslims, and non-alignment in relation to domineering powers. I asked how it could work for this country constitutionally supporting all Muslims when not all Muslim states are our friends.
شما مثلا حالا فلسطین یا لبنان یا هر جای دیگر مگر لبنان هویت واحد داره؟
Do you see any unified identity in Lebanon, Iraq or Palestine? We have many close friends and allies in Iraq, but there are also Daesh militants who are allied with Saudi Arabia. In Lebanon, a large proportion of the population comprises Shias. Some Sunnis in Lebanon support the resistance, but some Christians are followers of the West and the US.
We said the Islamic resistance had been successful. Since 1979, revolutionary Shiism has linked Tehran with a network of Shia groups in the region. These include Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. And it's not just a matter of fighting power, but winning the hearts and minds of regional brethren. Mr. Tawakkoli tells of what Western powers have attempted.
غربی‌ها یک چیزو در طول تاریخ مهارت پیدا کردن.
Thanks to their dominance on some countries and groups, the Western governments have learned a strategy. They use others in order to reach other objectives. We have to keep in mind that some so-called revolts are coups targeting resistance. That's a fact. Such moves would resolve no problems. People are entitled to bring up their demands, but if bloody unrest is triggered across the society, that would not be acceptable.
To get back in tune, staying at home doesn't mean folks had to miss the occasion. The whole of Iran was turned into one big Husseinia with national TV broadcasts of what's going on, and there were online eulogies to log into. As for what was going on out there, well, we did give you a brief viewing of how it was mostly in open spaces with relative social distancing by allowing people into authorized places only on specific days and at limited hours, with face masks. Safeguards were spelled out by the National Coronavirus Task Force and prepared in brochures for congregation halls. That's all regarding Tasu'a Ashura this year. But we're on every week, each with a new topic at the same times. So do tune in and don't forget to leave your comments and topic requests. Thanks for watching and bye for now.